Hello everyone, welcome to the explanation video of the smaller 7x7 seamless funnel door. This is the one with slime blocks and honey blocks instead of the one that's slimeless and honeyless. So this is 676 blocks by me and Kevin. You might know him before as Not Anthony. So and also here I would like to give special thanks to the Force Horse 11, actually along with Kevin as well, for the bottom floor triplet sequence, and also special thanks to the previous record holder Bruibri and YellowBunny for the layout idea, because we basically took some concepts from them, and yeah, thought it's nice to still give them some credit. So this door works unfortunately quite slow, so I'll just let you see it operating while I talk about today's agenda. So basically, as usual, I will, have a document where I list out all the questions that I will be answering. So you can find that in the description below, as long as the well download as well. So yeah. So the questions will basically revolve around three main topics. One is the timings and working principle, basically talking to you how this tool works and what the timings needed for it. And then the second part would be the piston powering layout construction, sequencing, and input joints. So as the name suggests, I will talk about how the layout is constructed, and then what are the sequences for the door, and then what are the useful input joints and how the input should be located, etc. And then the last part is the planning and residue analysis, where I go a bit more deeper into answering questions on why something is meant to be like that, why I use this, why I didn't use that, see, and what you can learn from it, what are the tricks, and what should be noticed when wiring the door, etc. So yeah. And for this door specifically, I'll also include some detail on the construction of hopper rooms. So yeah, hopefully you find that useful and interesting. So yeah, either way, yeah, just leaving the door working on itself for now. And feel free to skip to any questions you're interested. Just skip out any questions that you thought you can answer them by yourself already without me explaining to you. So, yeah. And by looking at this transparent version, probably you will also see some sequences for the top honey extender. But in case you didn't see it, don't worry. I'll explain this one. So let's go on to the first section, which is the timings and working principle. In this section, I'll answer basically how the door works and what are the timings needed to make some of the extenders work. So let's hop on to question 1. To explain the timings and working principle of the bottom slider circuit. So this includes the singles and the doubles, essentially. Now, the basics of it. I have a hopper arm, essentially. So there are two outputs that would control the sliders. One is this dot here. We detect the signal string to power the slider piston here, and the top one. The other is from this comparator turning off here or turning on, and then going to these two slider pistons here. So the principle is to have the doubles extended first, so for the closing, and then retract, and then have the singles powered later. But then the opening is reversed. We'll have the singles that will retract first, and then we will allow the doubles to extend and retract. Now, the reason behind this is quite straightforward. You can see that we are using observers that power through the door blocks to facilitate for the doubles, the front pistons here to fire. So the singles must be present here for the doubles to fire. So hence the singles must be pulsed after the double extends during closing and pulsed before the doubles retract during the opening. So yeah, basically that's that. And yeah, so this is the general working principle, and the helper ROM will make sure that this will work nicely. So here, this will give 2 pulses, while the comparator will obviously only give 1 pulse for each closing and opening, but just at different timings. And specifically is this, and then this, and then the opening is this, and then this. So now, specifically, let's talk about the timings. You can see that the place where timings is really involved is actually on the doubles, essentially. But then I'll also just give you, singles. Just this. It's just nothing much. So there's nothing interesting for the singles, actually. So, talking about the doubles. So we have this observer that will pulse this piston here, and then 2 ticks after, because there are 2 observers here, we'll have this dust here that actually pulses the top slider here only instead of the bottom. We don't want that. And then for this auto sending back, we detect from the top slider, because this is the slider that will always get powered no matter this observer or this observer. So we detect from here, dispenser going to here, so this would pulse this slider first, and then 2 ticks after. So why is it 2 ticks? Well, you can see from this observer we have here 1 tick, here another tick, so 2 ticks. So again, we have 2 ticks, and then these 2 will fire at the same time. So this is symmetrical to this, and then this has a 2 tick delay to this, which is also symmetrical to this and this. So now the reason behind this kind of 2 tick delay is also quite straightforward. It basically has to do with how we basically control our extenders. So this is a very standard way. By having a 2 tick delay, not only do we facilitate the extension of the double, but we also allow it to retract automatically. So this timings work pretty neat. If you have any other timings, it won't do that, unfortunately. So that's why we opt for this kind of 2 tick delay, and yeah, it's very useful. So that's that, basically. And then that's question 1. So question 2. So explain the timings and working principle of the side slime extender, which is this thing. So let's just see how it works first. Okay. So how does it work? So it basically relies on this kind of observer slider thingy. So there are 2 sliders. One is moving the door frame blocks, one is moving these observers. So when the slider pushes up, actually I should say there are 3 observers that you have to take note of. This. When the slider pushes up, this observer would be 1 block upwards, and it will pulse the back piston. So this is the first piston that will pulse. And then this observer would go up, and then 2 ticks after, because a repeater and an observer, so 2 ticks. In game ticks, it will be 4 game ticks. So in case I didn't mention the game tick equivalence, just multiply it by 2, because I always use redstone ticks myself as a habit. So yeah. So 2 ticks or 4 game ticks after, it will pulse this dust here, which the middle piston would be at this location. So, it will fire. So this is when the slider goes up. And then when it goes down, this observer will be at this location to fire the front piston at this level here. So hence, we will see this happening. And of course, 2 ticks will be sufficient enough between the back piston and the middle piston. And of course, the slider pushing down has sufficient delay already, so no worries on that. So that is the part on the closing. And the opening, what you need to notice is that this observer will push up to here to power through this obsidian to power this dust here. So it will power this piston here. And also this block will actually be down here, the solid block. So no worries on that. And then 2 ticks after, again, because this and this power at the same time. So, 2 additional ticks from here, or 4 game 6. And then it will fire the middle piston, which is already shown here. So, and then when the slider pushes back down, we'll have this piston that this observer that pulses the back piston here. So yeah, and that's what it does basically. So again, the timings are basically equivalent, even symmetrical even. So yeah. So the slime extent is quite easy to understand. What's not so easy to understand is the following question, question 3. So explain the timings and working principle of 2 things. The side seamless pistons. So talk about these, and also the slider. This. Let's talk about the easier ones, these 4. They detect on when the slider pushes down. So this observer here. And this makes sense because we would want the seamless pistons to be pulsed after the back piston retracts during the opening. So because that's the last thing that it does, so we just have to have the down position instead of the up position. So yeah, this detects when the slider goes down instead of going up, because that will be too early. And then with some delay here, it will just power these accordingly, and of course with sufficient delay. So these are easily explained. The hardest one to explain is this one. It basically powers at the same time as this piston here, because you see this observer will power these 2 when it goes up, and then when it goes down, these 2 observers will power these 2 at the same time. And that already raises a fundamental question, does this even work? And of course, if I show you in this door, the answer is yes. But then the reason is actually quite unintuitive. So what we have here is this thing. Because if you normally just do some kind of this here, it actually doesn't really work, unfortunately. But then you might ask, well, if this here doesn't work, but then how does here work? Now, you have to recall from one of the things I've mentioned in 2-3, which is on the priorities of sliders. So when a slider moves, it will always be the furthest block that has the most priority and the closest block that has the least. So we are concerned on this slider pushing down. So this has priority than this here. What does this mean? This means that when we are at this position here. So we also have observers at here. Okay. So we have both of these powering at the same time. So this basically would do something like this. But then what actually happens is that this observer would depower earlier than this observer finishes powering. What does this mean? This means that before this block actually gets dropped and be affected by will affect the slime. The slime actually retracts first before this block actually gets dropped. And then when this depowers, the block actually gets dropped here. So, yeah. So by making use of, slider priorities, we actually have the case that this is a reliable setup. Even though they're exactly at the same timings. But then, even at the same tick, their behaviors are determined by some priorities within tick. So that's that explained. Now on the sliders, or I should say this kind of slider. So the question in concern is, how do I time the slider such that the slime extender doesn't stick with it or get affected by it? So we just consider two cases. The closing, what we are concerned is the middle piston, because that will be the position where it will try to stick with the door frame blocks, but then it doesn't. So let's consider the timings. Here, t equals 0 when this piston extends. So one tick after, or 2 game ticks, this pushes, and then this has 2 ticks of delay, so 3 ticks here. So these blocks won't be able to be moved by other stuff until 4.5 ticks. So if you translate it to game ticks, it will be 6 to 9. So 3 to 4.5, 6 to 9 game ticks. Meanwhile, this observer will go up and then power the repeater 2 ticks or 4 game ticks after. So that's a property. And then because there are 2 more ticks of delay, so this means that the middle piston is powered at 4 ticks or 8 game ticks, which coincides in 3 to 4.5. So 4 coincides in 3 to 4.5. So this means that the middle piston extends the slime extender when these blocks are still sliding, basically. So yeah. So that's why the closing it will work. So the opening, I don't expect you to be able to fully explain on this because this is basically out of the syllabus already. The opening, we are concerned on the back piston. So when the slider pushes down, call it t equals 0, 1 tick here. So, and then here will be 3 ticks. Okay. But then, this observer here will power this piston from 2 to 3. So you see the problem. We have pushing at 3 here and depowering at 3 here. So which one does first? And of course, because I'll always show you a reliable door, so it will always be this here. But the reason here is basically out of syllabus. But what you can basically understand is that because this observer is static, but this observer is moving, and they have lower priority than the static. You can understand that stuff. I'm not going to go through the exact explanation. So yeah, but hopefully you accept this kind of explanation, and we'll just move on basically. So that's question 3, and then we will have question 4, which relates on this dust here. This dust you can see that is useful in powering these, but then it's not really that useful in powering this because this double already takes care of it. And this actually powering at the wrong time will cause this to break. So the question is, why doesn't it break? So of course this will be related to timing. So we basically just see, what happens. So from this 4 tick turning on, we call this t equals 0, 1 tick after. this pushes down. So we're concerned on this observer here. 1 tick, 2, 3, because this adds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 or 14 game ticks. This powers. Or I should say this powers. On the other hand, this is a 4-tick pulse generated. So when it turns off, we get 0 to 4, 5, 6. 6 here. So the front piston powers from 6 to 7. And then because it is retracting, because it basically is retracting, this piston won't be able to be fired or be moved basically until 8.5. So yeah, basically from 6 to 8.5, this piston can't be moved. This powers at 7. What does that mean? That means this piston does nothing, because the block in front can't be moved either way. So that's that. So yeah, so and then that's question 4. A bit related to question 4 is question 5. Why do the sites require this kind of weird input? Now, just to give you some context, originally this size isn't supposed to be powered like this. It's supposed to be just a 1 pulse. It will work very nicely. The unfortunate thing is that we only have outputs from here, which connects to the double pulse, and then we can only detect it from the double block here. So we can detect from a double pulse, or I should say we have an output of a double pulse. And if we just try to wire it directly, there's actually some issues. It's related to the doubles again. The reason why it doesn't work is because by giving it a double pulse, it actually will update itself via QC up here through this block. This causes this piston to block this piston from pushing at the correct time, because you see there's a 4 tick here. Well, it will give 2 pulses. This is supposed to push at the first pulse, but then because this blocking, this actually only can push during the second pulse. And pushing during the second pulse has a big problem. This already finishes retracting, and when this powers this piston, it'll break. And you can already see it here. So, and then only when this here and then, you know, this side doubles will do things unintentionally. But then, by running a double pulse to a redstone lamp, we actually make the double pulse more distant. And by making it more distant, it will no longer be affected by this here, basically. You can count the timings by yourself, just take it as an exercise, you can say. But then, you know, just trust me that, you know, it doesn't affect anymore. So great. So that's that result. So that's question 5. And then now we go back to here to answer question 6. Explain the working principle of the bottom for the triple. Now, I'm not going to go too much on the timings, actually, in this question. So just going to go through the basic things. So we have 3 inputs here. Input A here, input B here, input C here. I will later go through back to this setup here. We are not concerned on the timing, the sequences right now. So what the door would do is basically do this. What this does basically is pushes this here. This observer will go to this observer originally here, and then this observer will power this block QCing this piston, which will get updated by this observer and then push this observer to here. So yeah, very interesting. And then now comes inputs B and C, because we cannot redo input A here, because this will push this piston here. Of course, we can actually do it in some timing specific way, but then here we don't have the privilege of doing that, let's just say. So we do B2 here, and then we do C here. Suppose that we are concerned with the retraction, so we just do A, and do A again. So that's basically how it works. Both the closing and the opening is the same thing. So yeah. Also, the fact that, you know, we have this here, as we previously seen, it powers 3 times actually. This actually matches with what we have here, because we're actually going to detect from this slider circuit, which actually powers 3 times. So we will detect it from here and then go to here and then just power the circuit itself. So the slider powering 3 times is also a result of why this part does something like that. And then we just have to add these 2 inputs in. Yep, so that's question 6 answered basically. But if you want to re-see the actual circuit, you know, the slider here, it would take an output from here, and then this here would go to here. So we do 1 pulse here, and then this comparison will turn on a bit later to do, you know, this here and this here, as you can see, like that. And then it will do the 2 pulses needed to do the final retraction. Opening is the same thing. So, yeah. Right, so let's go on to question 7. Now we focus on the top honey extender. It's here. The things I want you to notice is that there are several components. One is the seamless pistons here. One is the pusher pistons here. This here doesn't really count because this observer already takes care of it by the honey extender retracting itself. And then the rest is just the honey extender itself. We need to power this here first, then go this here. So what we'll do is that the honey extender will push 1 block downwards, and then these pistons will retract such that the blocks don't stick with the honey, or otherwise it will be too much of a for the honey to push. So, and then we'll have this here, and this observer is basically responsible for this pushing here. So, and then during the opening, I actually should add some remarks, is that because we have the inputs from the right to the left, we actually power the singles here first, and also powering these as a result. And of course, we need to power these like that. It has to basically be an odd number of pulses, so just remember that. And yeah, we also don't take any output from here on the left, so we rely completely on the right. Okay. So that pulse will already retract these blocks, and then the slime extender, the honey extender will do its own thing. I will explain a bit more on the honey extender push limit stuff later, but now let's just focus on the interaction of this and this essentially. And then here I would slow the game down, because now you would see that this would retract, and then we'll have these seamless pistons that will extend, and then we'll actually have the back the pusher pistons being pulsed twice by a 4-tick interval here. And, yeah. And the 4-tick interval is also important because, first off, it can only be 3-tail 4-tick because I talk about, odd number of pulses for the singles, or otherwise the blocks will just left out be here. It's not good. Secondly, it cannot be a 3-tick because this will only generate 3 pulses for this piston, which will leave the block out here instead. So it needs to be a 4-tick pulse, so a 4-tick interval. So yeah. So that's the part that I want you to notice here first. The second thing that I want you to notice is basically some kind of reliance on the 12 block push limit. Now you see this extender works quite weird. So here it doesn't extend because it actually attaches this block. But then when this block is gone, then this extender can actually extend now. And then now it's just some more pulses. And then wait for a bit. Okay. And then now we can track this block and go here. And then the opening probably is the thing that's more interesting. Now, to retract this block, we actually need to retract it back up and then go back down. And also notice that there, because this block is here, the piston actually cannot retract this. So this allows this to push back down. And then now this will retract upwards. And then this does not retract here because this block is here. This is kind of an annoying thing, rather. But yeah. But then now it will get resolved here. And then now the interesting part comes. Now, what happens when you go down here? We would expect this to extend, right? But then due to push limits, it's actually at 30 now. Because this piston retracted this block here. So yeah, quite interesting. So this actually cannot extend it. But it can retract it. Because it does not need to extend this block. See? And then just some more push limit stuff. And then, this block being here would not allow this to retract. But then this block pushed down would allow the block to retract. So that's why we need a bit more pulses, basically. And later you will see exactly how many pulses we need. So you can see that it kind of relies on these blocks here being here, such that the push limit is exactly revolving around 12 and 13 to make the extender work. It's also quite annoying, but then it also kind of relies on it in some way, you can say. So it's quite an interesting interaction. So yeah, so that is the working principle of the top honey extender. A bit related is question 8. Why do I use honey instead of slime? Now, this is probably very easily explained by some knowledge in 1-2. I will spare you some time. Okay, I want you to focus on this observer, basically, and the piston here. Okay. So this observer will push to here, but then because the honey is a transparent block, so it doesn't pulse the piston. Only when it retracted does it pulse the piston. That's the reason why I need to use honey. Honey is transparent. Slime blocks are solid. So yeah, that's why. There's nothing much. So yeah, and with that basically explains the stuff I wanted to explain in the first section. Okay, so now let's go on to the second section. which is on the piston powering construction, sequencing, and input joints. Now, a bit different from the previous question, or actually I should say the previous videos, where I basically just asked you from scratch on how to make a piston layout. But then here we actually took inspiration from the previous records, so we'll start from here, the previous record's layout, and then we'll modify it to our current layout. So basically how to modify based on the previous layout. So because we were compacting, we cannot afford a free high bottom here. We obviously have to make it go. And instead, just use standard doubles. And then we also want our forward triple. So, just do it like this, like so. We'll worry about the powerings of these a bit later, but then for now, just leave it as it is. So that's the bottom piston layout. The sides, there are some modifications we will do with concern on basically the wiring space, essentially, because as you wire, you would notice some parts that have to go, or some parts that are very obviously not going to work. For example, this piston here, it blocks the bottom too much. We don't want it here. We want it to be here. But then, this actually gives too much pressure on the slime extenders. We still need one to be sticky piston, so we just change it up to one on top. Equivalently here as well. They're symmetrical. Now, for this slider here, we actually do it reversed again, because top needs a bit more space, and we can actually afford this to be at the bottom instead. So that's the size. And then the top, well, the layout works, but then the unfortunate case is that it does rely on these kind of sliders. And this actually causes a lot of trouble for the side doubles, because what you see here is that we have this kind of observer here, and observer here, this is a very standard double. And it's also very helpful because it's quite small. And yeah, having this is quite annoying, and we can't figure out a way of doing it, so we just remove it, basically. Now, removing this, well, what we have in a replacement is for something like this. Okay. But then this actually gives too much blocks for the extender. So we cannot have, this piston here, which is also actually landlocked as well. This piston here, yeah, basically a free extender thing. If you cannot see how it works. So I rarely use this layout actually. But then, so this pushes down, this goes here, like this. So this is in fact a triple extend as well. So instead of using this kind of layout here, we really cannot do that. This is landlocked, this is landlocked, we have nothing to do. So instead we have this here. We also don't need this for now. Well, actually, we can't do. We will have a normal piston instead. Alright. So this kind of layout would work, as we've previously established already. Okay, so that's on the piston layout. Yeah, so that's that, essentially. Just compacting the bottom, modifying a bit on the sides, the top, and yeah, that's that. And of course, you can replace it with putney if you want to. Now, we are concerned on the powering layout. So for the bottom, this won't work, obviously. We do need to rely on, the slide circuit that I've introduced in 2-8. So let's just build that. So this would go here. Then we will have this here. Then to correspond to these pistons, we'll have the respective observers up here. And then we also have here, to facilitate for singles, we will have the corresponding observers down here. Yeah. And then this observer is just for, the circuitry that we have, just to detect from the top slider here, but then, we just include that in the powering layer as well, PS1. So we just have something like this. So that solves the bottom part, basically. You can also argue that there should be some inputs for this here, because it's also kind of fixed here already. We just make use of the bottom folder triple developed by Kevin and the force horse. So this is already known before we even wire the door. So yeah, we'll have something like this. For sides, I argue that we don't really need any input joints because once you build a circuit, you already know how it's going to go. We don't really need to do input joints. Not input joints. We don't really need to do the powering layout for the size. But then one thing that I think is useful is to do this kind of auto push up for the sliders. The timings here would be good enough for it to go. And it's quite neat. So we just focus ourselves on the top. The top doesn't really have much except we want to power this piston, but then a much easier way to do that is just to place a block here. So when the honey extender retracts, this observer will automatically power this piston here. Now we also need to power this piston at both of these two levels. So the best way to do that is just to have an observer here, push it with sticky piston. And to make this work, we'll have this kind of setup. Now in the actual door, it actually doesn't look like this. It looks like this. So a repeater here, but then we know that the repeater is going to be pulsed. We also will have a vortic here for this piston. So and then for convenience in the wiring of these pistons, we decided that we will have this here. So yeah, so that's basically the powering layout, essentially. Yeah. Okay, so now we go to question 11. So state the minimum move sequence for the bottom fold triple. I already kind of did that in question 6, but then let's just do that again. So suppose we have 3 inputs like this, and then we don't want it to depend too much on timings. So what we'll do is A here. We cannot do A here to extend this piston because once again, this piston will push this, so that's not good. So we instead do B2 here and do C here. And then all we need to do is just A. This will automatically retract this, and then A. So yeah. So this will be our minimum move sequence, which is A, B2, C, A, A. There you go. And this is also, in fact, the sequence that we use in the actual door. So pretty nice. So question 12. State the minimum move sequence and the improved sequence of the slime extenders. So we have A, B, C, D here. So we need to consider D with this singles as well. So I'll just place that here. So closing is, for the minimum move sequence is extremely straightforward, and as well as the opening as well, because what we do is just the back piston, middle piston, and front piston, and then the opening is just the reverse. So we'll always opt D to be powered at last. That's our assumption. Of course, there are some other possible minimum move sequence, but then we just assume that D will always be powered last. So A, B, C, D. So that's the minimum move sequence for the closing. And then the opening, as I said, is just the reverse. C, B, and then I'll pretend this piston works. So I just do A, and then this piston block will go out. Like so. And then D. And you also kind of see the reason why I say D is assumed to be last, because we need to wait until the slime extender finishes its retraction in the opening, and then we power the seamless pistons here. So we can write that down. Minimum move sequence for the closing would be A, B, C, D, whereas the opening will be C, B, A, D. So now we would improve our sequence, and the best scenario is to make it such that both the closing and the opening, they're the same. And that would be nice because it's fully repeatable. Now, the thing is, we notice some redundancy here. So what moves can we power such that it's redundant but doesn't really affect how the extender works? The point is to note A and C. So during the closing, for example, we power A, but then it doesn't hurt if we power C as well. So we can power A and C together. And then we just do B. And then this position is the same. We power C, right? But then it doesn't hurt if we power A as well. So that's the thing. So A and C can always be powered together. And this idea also works similarly for the opening. It doesn't hurt if we do A and C together. And then B. And then basically A and C together. And of course here it doesn't really work with this block here. So yeah. So by noticing that A and C can be done together, we have the following improved sequence. So A and C, B, and A and C, and then finally D. So that is one of the tricks that I will teach you in 3-3, which is on, noticing these redundant moves, basically. But then, you learn it here as well. So that's question 12. And then now question 13 is on the top. So I don't require you to state the minimum move sequence for the top honey extender, because it's too complicated and useless. What I only require you is the improved sequence. So I assume that you basically know how the honey extender works already. And then from that, you also get some insights on how to improve your sequence upon it, and then develop the improved sequence or the final sequence, basically. So, again, an assumption is that we parse C first. So the same goes here. We always assume C is part first. This also coincides with the fact that we leech off from the right to the left, and the left does not take any output from the sides, except for this minor thing here, which actually isn't the main circuit either way. So we do C first. And then the annoying part comes is that we would do A and B a bunch of times. So let's just see how many times at minimum. Okay. So A, B, that's second time. A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. So that's actually the sixth time. Okay. So how many more times can we power before it doesn't really close the door already? So 7, 8. So what about 9? 9 is the first pulse when this honey extender starts to retract. So we have a degree of freedom. We can power during the closing either 6, 7, or 8 times. And I will later tell you that 8 times is the only way to go. But then, yeah. So I will write the improved sequence as A, B, 8 times. I will explain to you why a bit later. But yeah, either way. So now this is the 9th time, but then let's just reset our counter. So this is the first time in the opening now. So 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 8 times during the closing and 14 times during the opening. It's not exactly repeatable, but then, there's a bunch of overlapping parts already, so it's already good enough. Oh, one last thing. During the opening, you see these blocks, right? They have to be pushed. So we need to give C 2 pulses because actually I forgot to give the first pulse during the opening. But yeah, either way. So we will do C and then A, B 14 times. And then now we will give C 2 more pulses. And they have to be at least 4 tick or 8 gain tick apart. Because otherwise, as I've already mentioned, this piston will leave out its block, which is not nice. And of course, we need to give it 2 pulses because otherwise these will leave their blocks. So that's also not nice. So yeah. So our improved sequence would be C A B times 8. But then for the opening is C A B times 14. Then C C, which the second C has to be 4 ticks or 8 game ticks after at least. Okay. So that's the improved sequence for the top honey extender. And follow-up question 14. What are the possible input joints for a top honey extender? I'm sure it's pretty obvious. It's just A and B. Very literally. And of course, we need to make sure that it has sufficient delay. The reason is because, on the last pulse, basically, this observer will go up and then push this down. So we need to reserve a bit more delay and then to push this piston. So A and B would be the input joints, which you also see here, basically, like that. So, and the final question in this section, question 15, where should the input be positioned? The answer is very straightforward, actually. It's the bottom. I don't see any reason why it's not the bottom. You can technically argue it's the top as well, but then there's a very strong reason why it's the bottom. The reason is we need to control the sliders, and to control sliders we need ROMs, and ROMs, the best way to do that is just have to have an input next to it, basically. But then you will argue, hey, the top also needs ROMs. Well, that's true, but then it's much easier to do at the bottom, because the bottom you also need to, well, not really that, but either way. Yeah. Well, I should say that the top also has some kind of, issues, let's say. The annoying thing is kind of when you go from top down to the bottom, and then, basically what happens after that. And it's actually kind of annoying to figure it out. Basically, I will argue. So, yeah. And if you know me, I do a lot of stores with inputs at the bottom, usually. Yeah, it's kind of my habit. Although I will argue that there's a very valid reason for a bottom input instead of the top input. The top kind of also relies on, well, you can say that because the top has both these and these two control, which are kind of spread apart. So it's best to do them a bit more simultaneously by the sides. And also top just has a bit more space than the bottom to do the signal transmission. Whereas the bottom actually doesn't really have that many space. Although you can argue that this whole thing here is, but then this space here is kind of useless either way. So the effective space you only have is just the free white space. And this space here kind of is just the useful part is just here. This part is kind of not that useful, unfortunately. So basically a mix of preferences and also realizing some objective things. For example, the bottom quite literally has less space and needs to control a bit more stuff than the top. So yeah, so that's that. Hopefully this explanation satisfies you. If not, you can argue with me still on the basis that the top should be. But pretty much the size won't be, definitely, because size should be symmetrical. And if you have the input at one of the sides, this means that you break the symmetry, which is not good, because you would need to wire the sides differently, basically, which is not nice. So yeah. So that's the end of this section, and then now I'll go on to the planning and risk analysis part. So the main questions I will answer is, why is the current layout being used? What should be taken caution when wiring this door, and also the tips and tricks. Okay. So to answer the very fundamental question, why do we basically abandon the previous layout and opt for this layout instead? For the bottom, the reason is very obvious. We need to compact this door. So we cannot use it. We have to use this kind of layout, which fortunately I've already done that before, but then at a larger volume. This time it's a bit smaller. So yeah. Now for the sides, the unfortunate thing that brings from the bottom is that bottom actually requires a bit more space. So I cannot afford a piston here. That's also the reason why I put this on here and then change this here. Those kind of stuff. So we just change up the size a little bit. There's not much actually. But then the top is quite a bit more problematic. Is that, as I already explained it, is that having this slider occupies some crucial space of powering the side doubles. And we don't want that, basically. Like, when we started this project, we thought it will be easy just to copy the size and top from the previous record and then just slap and improve bottom. But then we find out that it's actually very hard to do so. With the reason of the bottom really needs a lot of space, and also their side circuit has a specific powering method which we literally cannot afford. So yeah, we wanted to incorporate some of the circuitry of the previous record into this door, but unfortunately we can't, basically. So basically a change up in the bottom and a change up in the bottom affects the sides, and then the sides also we find that it's quite hard to cooperate with the top. And that's why we abandoned the idea of incorporating any circuits from the previous door. So yeah, and ended up with a door that is very slow, unfortunately. So yeah. And also changing up the top without the sliders will result in these pushers, which will actually bring these blocks up to here, but then this will actually be too much of a push limit if we don't have the sliders here. So we also have to change up this kind of stuff completely. So we don't have this, we don't have this, and then in return we have some other things. And also these pusher pistons, as I've already said, landlocks the pistons here originally. So yeah, we cannot have that. Okay, so that's this part. Question 17. Can the side sliders, this kind of slider, be reversed? Reverse meaning you just have this instead. There's no definite answer, but not preferred, obviously. The reason is the top really needs this vortex repeater as an example. So basically, if we have this one up, then it is annoying to power these pistons. It's also annoying to power this piston without affecting the size or something. So it's just overall annoying. And also, if you realize in here, we really don't have much space to do that. So if you have this here, then yeah, you also need to incorporate some circuit here, which will actually hinder the possibilities we have with the top. So yeah, it's not that preferred. So that's why we opted for this kind of, which is kind of weird because we go from bottom to top, but then here it's just from top to bottom again. But then, in fact, we actually have a bit more space to wire it at the bottom than at the top. So yeah, it's just basically a trade-off. So which trade-off serves you better? And in this case, it's actually this kind of direction. Okay, So question 18. Now, if you have looked at 2-11-1, you would know that this bottom folded triple has a repeatable sequence. I don't need to use the input B. I just need A and C basically in this scenario here. Why is this repeatable sequence, such a repeatable and such a nice sequence, not used? Just throw it away. Now, the reason why we did that is the unfortunate case that the bottom can't do all the stuff we want. The bottom definitely needs to control the sliders themselves. If we need to control this with the repeatable sequence, which is basically having a vortex repeater here and then having an observer here, basically. Let me just show you. So repeatable sequence is this, 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 this. So yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have the privilege to even do this. Yeah, that's how little space we have for the bottom. Yeah, this kind of hopper-on panel here already hinders much of the possibilities that we have. And then, yeah, there's just not a good way to do this. So it's actually a bit more efficient to make use of the sliders what we have here to do stuff we want. And unfortunately, the sliders only has 3 pulses, so we just need to fill in the additional pulse that's missing. So we have 3 pulses from the slider. One is here, and then we fill in this, and then let this do stuff. So, and yeah, it's actually a bit more efficient to do in this way than to do the repeatable sequence. So this basically tells you that although repeatable sequences, they are a good thing because they're straightforward to control, you can say. But then in some scenarios when you have other interferences due to other circuits basically, and you already have not much space, you have to figure out some more clever ways of doing stuff without sticking to the repeatable sequence, for example. You might need to scrap up your sequence and find some alternatives to it. And this actually applies in some other doors of mine as well. So I have a few examples in mind. One would be the 7x7 cave door, the top folded triple, for example. So that also scraps the folded triple sequence. Repeatable sequences are nice, but it might not always be the solution. So, okay. Now, the most interesting part comes is that explain the hopper-ons and the thought process behind them. So there are 3 hopper-ons here. The first one is the input hopper-on. The second one is the top right hopper-on here. The third one is the top left hopper-on here. Okay. So the input hopper-on basically controls the bottom sliders and also access and output for the rest of the door. The top right hopper-on basically does 2 things only: controlling these seamless pistons and giving the last vortex pulse needed for these pistons. The top left hopper-on basically is just controlling the top honey extender. Okay. So let's go deep into each of them together. There are 11 snowballs, so 16 stackable items. This actually corresponds to a signal strength of 2. Now, adding one more item will make it a signal strength of 3. So just so you know. And we actually don't want that. We only want 2 because, as we have mentioned, this double here only requires 2 pulses. So yeah. Now, the minimum number of items needed for signal strength of 2 is 6. And also, due to some unfortunate limitations of wiring space, I have to do something like this to get an output to here. So kind of redundant comparing stuff here. So, but having 11 items where 6 items correspond to a signal strength of 2 means that this comparator will definitely turn on when there are 6 items here, because this will only have 5 items now, which is a signal strength of 1. Yeah, and during the opening, when this gets to 5 items, this will have 6 items, so this comparator will definitely turn off. So yeah, it's basically symmetrical in this case. And I think in other item configurations, it won't work that nicely. The timings would basically fail the triple. So yeah. So that's that. And in similar case, if you replace this with 64 stackable items, you also need to fill it until it is 1 away from the next signal strength change. So yeah, basically that. Originally, it's like that actually. But then later I found that, 11 snowballs also works. So that's nice. So that's the input ROM, which is basically just to control this here by having 2 pulses let out first, and then this comparator finally turning off after, the 5 item delay. So you have this here, but then the opening will do this thing first. And then only when this loses to 5 items will the double start to extend and retract. So yeah. So that's the input ROM. Now I will talk about the top right ROM first. That's the thing that comes afterwards. So this chest only has 1 item actually. So it's signal strength of 1. So this comparator needs a signal strength of 2 to turn on. The 5 snowballs here will correspond to, there's 2 signal strength essentially. So we allow 5 items basically as a delay for these pistons to retract. The reason why we need a delay is because we need to have this piston to extend 1 block first before these can retract. If these retract too early, well, it will already stick to the honey. So we need to allow this to extend first before these can retract. So yeah. So that explains why we need just a small delay, basically. Now that's during the closing, and these items are irrelevant during the closing, basically. And during the opening, these items will be relevant because we need to wait until this extender finishes its movement from this, this circuits here, and it requires this many items until the last item, which is a shovel. So why is a shovel? Well, a shovel already corresponds to 3 signal strength, basically, which is definitely more than 2. So it will guarantee that this comparator will turn on all the time until the shovel leaves. So we don't have to worry about maintaining a signal strength of 2. And then just let out stackable items, which will actually cause a bit more reset time. We just use shovel instead. So that's very convenient. So yeah, so that's the top right ROM, and then the top left ROM here is just a bunch of 16 stackable items filled until this has 12. Now, here there are 76 16 stackable items, which is one more than 75, and 75 16 stackable items is the minimum number of 16 stackable items needed for a signal strength of 14. Okay. So I'll explain why the extra item is useful. But first, recall that we developed this minimum moves, no, not minimum moves, the improved sequences as an 8 and a 14 split. When I told you that actually the closing can range from 6 to 8. So 6 to 8 will correspond to opening 14 to 16 to 14, I should say. So a total of 22 pulses needed for one cycle, and then the closing has a range which is 6 to 8. So the opening will be 16 to 14. But then 14 is really the only option we have. I told you before. Now, it relates to something that we have to establish first, which is that, first off, we have the last 4 tick pulse, the 2 pulses from, this 4 tick here, to power these here. Now, what this corresponds to is that this piston will retract and extend the redstone block for a while. So, this explains the extra item needed here. It is to make sure that this circuit doesn't have a signal strength change due to the 2 pulses given to here. Because otherwise, it would change the signal strength here and then accidentally power this honey extender, which we don't want. So that's why the extra item is here. So it just gives a small delay, a small buffer such that the 4 tick 2 pulse would be ignored. So that's the first thing we need to know. And this results to the second thing why the 8-14 split is necessary. We cannot have 15, because if we have 15, then when this 2 pulse comes in, then this thus will immediately lose 1 signal strength and will accidentally power the honey extender, which we don't want. So we cannot have 15 signal strength. We can only have 14 signal strength, such that we can add the extra item here as a buffer. So given that the opening can have a maximum of 14 signal strength, that means, or 14 pulses translated. So this means the closing must have 8 signal strength changes, or 8 pulses. So that's why it's 8-14 split instead of, the potential 7-15 splits, which might be possible, but then I showed it here because we have 2 pulses that comes in redundantly, and to avoid this thus having a signal strength change, we cannot have the 7-15 split. We obviously cannot have the 16 splits, because that's 16 is already more than 15, so this is definitely not possible. At least under this binary hopper ROM setting. So yeah, and one more thing to account for is that this has 2 shovels and 64 stackable items, which translates to exactly 7 signal strength. And if you know, this is a very special case. So for any movable containers, you cannot have a 7 signal strength, because composters, it ranges from 1 to 8, excluding 7, because 7 automatically turns to 8, because the stuff in the composter will compost, obviously, and turns to 8. So unfortunately, we need to push a solid block and then go up to have this comparator detect the hopper behind it. So it's just nothing that much of a nuance here. We have space here. So the important question is, why 7? Well, by comparing this comparator with a signal strength of 7, this means that the dust will in the closing can go from 14 to 8, but then when it goes to 7, because it can go from 14 to 7 because it's in compare mode. So 7 compared to 7, it will still output as 7. So it can go from 14 to 7. Okay. But then anywhere below it will be 0. So from 14 to 7, it experiences 7 signal strength changes. And then from 7 to 0, it experiences the 8th signal strength change. So this is why we need 7 signal strength. So yeah, because from 14 to 7, we have 7 signal strength changes. And then from 7 directly to 0, we have 1 more signal strength change. So 8 signal strength changes in total, which corresponds to the 8 pulses for the closing. And at the opening, the block will be retracted so that we actually experience 14 signal strength changes. So that's why this is useful. This is to make such that the closing has less pulses than the opening. So yeah. So that's that. That's question 19. And hopefully this part is interesting. And then the last question, finally. So what are the tricks used at the sides? So yeah. One I already mentioned actually. So it is on these 2 pistons here. So the use of, sliders, the powering priorities to make this thing reliable, because this will depower before this puts the block at here. So it's very nice. And another trick is actually the layout itself. So to avoid the slime extender from sticking with these door frame blocks, instead of using the traditional, some kind of like this, so pulling, pushing, or here just simply pushing, we just slide the blocks instead. So yeah. So this, you can also regard this as a trick, basically. So just slide the blocks such that they cannot stick with the slime extent. So yeah. And that concludes everything I want to explain in this video. Now, this door is I can't really think of any exercise questions for you. It's actually a bit simpler than you might expect. This door. So there's only explanations without exercise questions. So yeah, this time. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy the explanation, and hopefully I explain things well, and hopefully you learn something useful, I guess. So yeah, and as always, the work download will be in the description below, where I would just give you the circuits I have for explanation, basically. But other than that, thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.